My name is Dan Crone, or CCP Convict. I'm the Senior Community Developer for EVE Online at CCP Games.
We're 20 years in to EVE Online. So many stories have been told, such a huge player base. How do you feel to be in this position, working with such a huge and passionate player base?
Well, it's an incredible privilege. I actually started playing EVE Online myself all the way back in 2004. And I didn't join CCP until 2019. So I had been a part of this community for a really, really long time before I even started working at the company. So I was the one coming to FanFests and sitting in the crowd and watching the presentations, then going to the pub crawls with the other developers and getting to meet them. And that sort of spurred me on to sort of working on the EVE community in Australia, where I started doing player gatherings and for a while was running EVE Down Under, which was the big Australian time zone meetup. So having spent so much time in and amongst the community for all of those years, to then come to CCP and take the black, as it were, when there was still black dev shirts, they're grey now, has been like an amazing thing to do. There's 20 years of history behind the game, and there was a lot of that before I showed up. There needs to be a certain amount of, I think, respect for what the players have accomplished and done over the years, and the relationships they have and the things that they care about. And I think having EVE players on the community team, which is basically all the community team is comprised of right now, is long-term veteran EVE players. It makes it a lot easier for us in our role to be able to communicate with the players and also bring their feedback back to CCP and sort of try and make sure that their concerns and their joys are being shared internally with the company, which also spurs on the morale internally for when it comes to developing the game and making the next feature and those kinds of things.
How does it feel coming into 2023, where things are kind of back on track and you have this major milestone of the game itself?
It feels fantastic. We learned during COVID just how important a community like the one in EVE Online is for everybody, because a lot of the players were going through, lockdowns, isolation, things like that, and they were stuck at home. And people have reported to us that, being able to log into EVE every night and play the game with their friends the way they'd always done, because you don't have to meet up in person and play EVE, right? You just do it from your bedroom or your lounge room or your home office. Just gave them a lot of normalcy, and was able to sort of take their minds off those kinds of, the issues with like COVID and isolation and all those kinds of things. When we came back for our first FanFest last year, it was sort of like people were still only kind of just sort of delicately stepping back out into the real world, traveling again and those kinds of things. But this FanFest now, as well as celebrating the 20th year of EVE Online, also feels just a lot more natural. It feels more like the FanFest that I went to when I was a player back in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, because those things are so far in the back of our minds now that we can just sort of relax, and everything feels like it's getting back to normal, at least as far as the EVE community goes when we're getting around here.
As the community has evolved and as the CCP has evolved, how do you feel like the management of that community has also evolved coming into this year?
Well, there's sort of like the size of the community team for CCP over the years is sort of like waxed and waned. Sometimes it was 6 or 7 people, then sometimes it was only 2 people, but now we're up to like a good healthy team of about 5 dedicated community developers, as well as sort of like our manager. So it's a good solid team. Like I said before, pretty much everyone on the team right now is like a long-term EVE veteran as well. So we have sort of like deep connections into the player base, the communities, alliance leaderships, and things like that. So we have we can pick up the bat phone and speak to players and get really, really good feedback about anything that we want to talk about. And they feel comfortable approaching us as well, because they know that if they have something they want to articulate, then we'll get that. We'll understand what the issue is they're trying to talk about, and sometimes then we can be the layer of translation between the players and other aspects of EVE development.
As far as like the response and management of the community go, like obviously it's a very difficult thing to balance what you take in, what you react to, what you work with. And EVE in particular is such a social game where the players help drive a lot of the events, a lot of the narrative, a lot of the stories that are going on in that game. How do you balance the response and reaction to what's going on in the community, like where you get involved, where you let things play out, and how things proceed.
CCP kind of has a philosophy where we're basically just the janitors of New Eden, right? We talk about it as a sandbox MMO to sort of like stretch the metaphor. It's like we just make the toys and we throw them in the sandbox and see what the players are going to do with them. Sometimes they do unexpected things. Other times things go exactly as we would have expected. And so we've got to kind of try and like measure the feedback from the community, the sentiment, and bring that back into the company. One of the ways we do that is we do like a fortnightly sentiment report where we gather all of the feedback that we can get from the previous 2 weeks, and we spy on EVE players on Discords and Reddits and forums and pretty much any other source we can get our hands on the information of, and we collate that into a big report, and we sit down with EVE senior leadership every 2 weeks for like an hour and go over thoroughly. It's like, we released this patch on Tuesday, it had this feature, this feature, this feature, and this is how people responded to that and what they thought of it. And it's also a great platform for the community team to surface any sort of ongoing issues if players are unhappy with like the yields of a certain area of space. We can let them know, and that sort of trickles into development, and so then they can, all right, we'll get more asteroid fields to spawn in here or something like that. Or if there are some issues with mobility in a particular system, what can we do to make it easier for players to get around? Those kinds of things.
And this might be a little bit personal, but like acting as a bridge between the developers and the players, how do you like sort of balance the mental of being able to being the group that provides that feedback up to the developers, provides that feedback back to the players, and deals with the sort of consequences of what folks think of it on either side?
I mean, even though I said we're like really closely connected to the community, I personally also have to sort of try and also maintain a little bit of a detachment. Because if the community is on fire and not happy with something, I have to like not get sort of caught up in the current of that myself, because I sometimes would feel the same things where if something wasn't working the way it was supposed to, if there was some sort of bug that was annoying everyone, if a ship came out and was too underpowered or overpowered and people weren't happy about that, I'd have to sort of like, okay, just try and compartmentalize that, so that when I wasn't going around internally saying, going like, this is a disaster or something like that. So trying to maintain just like a little bit of analytical detachment, so that when I can speak to people internally, I'm just giving them the facts without putting my sort of layer of bias on top of it one way or the other, because sometimes I'm like, yeah, they're absolutely right. This does suck. But I can't then go in internally and present it as though it's my opinion, because it's really the player's opinion that accounts the most. So that's in terms of like the challenges, it's probably trying to like filter out my own ingrained EVE-ness, EVE player perspective after playing the game for so long, and then just like trying to do it, trying to have those conversations internally in a more dispassionate manner.
And that has to be an interesting thing, where like you came from the EVE player base to this role. You've been on that side, having probably had your own enthusiasm, your own frustrations. Being here, like with the developers, connecting with the developers, working with the developers alongside the community, do you feel like that gives the team a strength that it otherwise wouldn't have? Yeah,
I definitely think, like I said, the community team is made up of veterans right now. We have a lot of long-term relationships with a lot of influential people in the EVE community, and we're making new friendships every day. Them being able to speak to us on like a player-to-player level makes it easier for us to communicate with the players, and then we take it to like the developer-to-developer level. To just sort of try and get like a nice clean signal running back and forth between the community. The community team is also responsible for a range of projects, including like our live streaming project, the Council of Stellar Management, our partnership program management. All of that is handled by the community team, and those are all things that we're putting back into the community, whether that be like developer live streams to let people know what's going on with the game, giving resources to our EVE partners so that they can develop their platforms, whether they're like a third-party tools developer or a streamer or a YouTuber, so that they can have more content and grow their audiences as well. And with the Council of Stellar Management, it's one of those probably very unique things in gaming, where just today we elected, we announced the election of CSM 18. And that's a focus group of players who we bring inside the tent, who we can sign NDAs with, that we meet with weekly, sometimes more frequently, and say, here are our plans. This is actually what's going to be coming down the pipe. What do you guys think about that? And what, is there any adjustments we can make to avoid stepping on any landmines? Can you basically they're a sanity check for us, so we don't step on any rakes when we're deploying features into the game.
And with EVE Online being such a social game, obviously you've had factions build up over the years, clans, guilds, groups, and obviously there are so many different priorities among the player base when it comes to the game. How do you make sure that an established group, an established guild doesn't kind of override maybe independent players that aren't part of that and kind of have their own approach and experience with the game and their own concerns about what they want it to be?
Well, all the various teams at CCP work on different features discreetly, whether that's game and balance changes or UI or different art and those kinds of things. When it comes to game and balance changes in particular, though, we do have to be mindful that, if we do make a change, we're not just sort of helping to extend the lead of already sort of dominant groups. And we also, and we've done that recently through basically improving our new early game experience a lot. We've a couple of years ago we updated the tutorial and onboarding process for the game. Most recently we've introduced these home front operations, which help sort of new players sort of get established. At the end of the day, though, we can only do so much, because this is a social game and the players are the ones who design how this sandbox is meant to go. So they form into large alliances, and the alliances team together to form coalitions, and they just make these really, really large groups out of nullsec, which kind of dominate the space out there. It can be hard for new players to sort of get a foothold, and claim a little bit of space on their own. So normally they make the route of going through alliances or directly joining one of the bigger coalitions. We've made changes to the way sovereignty and resource distribution works over the years just to try and sort of get a better balance out there. But ultimately it's up to the players to decide how they want that area of space to be. So there are alliances now in the game who are becoming fiercely independent. They don't want to be part of these coalitions. They'll stay frenemies with their neighbors, but they're not going to blue up to each other, as we call it in EVE Online. Basically, form a formal alliance and then just agree to play nicely together in one area of space. So. With our next as very, very soon, we'll be introducing a new system in the game, which will affect how travel works a lot, which could have some implications for how fleets can move around those outer reaches of space, making it possible for maybe making it more difficult for people to sort of keep coverage on their entire area of space. That wasn't necessarily one of the design goals, but it'll be interesting to see how players take advantage of that.
Probably one of the most common things I hear about people that aren't into EVE Online is just how daunting it is, the idea of getting into the game to begin with. Everything is so established already that catching up, feeling like you're jumping into something that's already so far along, feels almost scary. How do you, as a community manager, respond to a person that's interested in EVE Online but is scared of taking that first jump into the pool?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things which kind of establish your lead in EVE Online. It's the amount of skill points that you've accumulated, which means, what activities you can do in the game, how well you can do them, what ships you can fly. And there's also your personal wealth, because if you've managed to scrape together a lot of currency, you can buy a lot of shiny, expensive things, and you have more options, and if you have a setback, it doesn't matter as much. So it's basically skill points and wealth, which I think is sort of the progression in EVE Online, because we don't use levels like a traditional MMO. So a new player coming to the game will be starting off from scratch, and there will be some people who've been playing the game for a decade or more, or maybe even 2 decades in some cases, who are very, very wealthy and very, very sort of entrenched. But the thing about EVE Online is it's a game of diminishing returns when it comes to your skill training. So it might take you hypothetically a week to train one of your important skills to level 4, but then almost another month to get it to level 5 for the same increment that you got from all the previous steps. So a new player who is arriving in the game will actually, relatively to the senior players who are now sort of their accumulation of accumulation of points. So a new player coming into the game will actually proportionally be gaining skills at a faster rate than an older player, because they're sort of starting to hit the ceiling of efficiency, whereas everything a new player trains is going to give them a big improvement in their abilities in the game. Along with that, through our sort of like daily login rewards, alpha skill injectors, which were things that didn't exist in the past. You had to train every skill point. Now there are other ways for you to get skill points to sort of increase the rate that your character develops. And there are opportunities in high security space now, like with the home front operations that we released in the last expansion, for people to team up together, and they can be quite lucrative. And you can do it in a fairly modest sort of fitted early game ship. To accumulate some income and some ISK so that you can buy more skills and buy more ships and do more things. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a bad time to get an EVE Online. I mean, it's just the way of the world. It's almost like saying, like, if you were born today, oh, what's the point? Because like there's always rich people with billions of dollars and things like that. Well, it's the same with EVE Online. You get born into a world in that scenario, but you grow. You just grow, and you play the game, and you develop, and you improve, and you get stronger, and you get knocked down, and you get back up again. And then one day, maybe you're the guy flying around in the blingy spaceship with billions of dollars. But you have a hell of a lot of fun in the meantime.
Speaking to more of the social side of that, like, how do you guide a new player into finding sort of their place in that universe, their place in that the community of EVE Online?
Well, we know from our own extensive research that one of the best things that we can do for retention is expose players to other players. So if a new player has come into the game, they get introduced to the game through a storyline-based tutorial session. And then they get dropped off at the front door of the career agents, and then they have an option to do what we call an epic arc, which is a long single-player story mission chain. The career agents are like a little sample of all the different things that you can do in the game. There's an introduction to mining and industry, PvP, PvE, and exploration. And by the time players have come to the end of that chain, they're like, right, well, what do I want to do now? And more than likely, as they go through that journey, they will have encountered other players along the way. For example, the final mission of that epic chain arc I talked about, the final boss is notoriously hard on purpose because we want people to ask for help in local to get someone to come along and help them beat this guy. And there are people who hang out in the solar system where that boss lives who just there all day to help people when they say, oh, this final guy is really tough, how do I beat him? It's like, I'll help you out. As well as a whole bunch of really cool organizations in EVE Online, which are player-run, dedicated explicitly to training new players and onboarding them. One that we always recommend is a group called EVE University. They welcome pretty much anyone into their ranks, and then you can just you can start playing with them. They have it's if you like a structured learning, they actually have like a curriculum, and different campuses, one in nullsec and one in wormhole space, where you can try different parts of the game. And there are a bunch of nullsec alliances, the bigger groups, who have like a new player academy corporation, which they just can boost people into. And they go out not knowing what's going to happen to them, but they're on TeamSpeak or Discord with 50 other people who don't know either, with a seasoned veteran leader who's like explaining them and showing them the ropes. And they get provided with skill books, and they get more cash and free spaceships just to sort of get a grip on the game and get them into content as fast as possible, because these big alliances know that they need to invest in new recruits and new players to fill out their ranks. And even if it's just a day 1 or day 2 player who's in like the cheapest little frigate, who's just flying one jump ahead of their fleet to see and report back what they see in local, a couple of weeks later they'll probably be flying like one of the DPS ships in the fleet, like as part of the core fleet. And then who knows from there, a year later maybe they're in charge of the fleets, as they accumulate experience and make these contacts.
How do you feel about the future of the EVE Online community, and what would you say you personally want to see most as we kind of are just on the verge of the next expansion?
Well, at the moment I'm feeling really, really optimistic about the future of EVE Online. Our last 2 expansions have been fantastic and touched some areas of the game which players have wanted to get some attention on for a long time, to a huge success. Factional warfare with Uprising is now sort of blowing up. And the corp upgrades, the corp management improvements that we made in Viridian is helping a lot of those smaller groups task their people, essentially letting the CEOs act as mission givers for their own corporation members, so that anytime a corporation member locks in, they can look at their jobs board and go like, oh, my corporation needs this, this, and this. I'll go do that activity, And so that's a really good way to sort of help those smaller organizations grow, because The bigger organizations have very sophisticated like IT infrastructure and you know, like HR and that sort of thing. Smaller groups, not so much. So this helps to sort of like close the gap between those two. Our next expansion, Havoc, which is coming in November. If you watch the keynote at FanFest, you'll see what's in store. I'm incredibly excited about the new content that'll be coming to the game. The pirate incursions, which look like going to be phenomenal. I'm probably going to sign up with the Angel Cartel myself to get in amongst that. And of course, the announcement of the FPS EVE Vanguard. That's going to change everything. It's going to be incredible because we have so many veterans from Dust 514 on the PlayStation 3 who want to get back into the game, and this will expose EVE Vanguard will expose a new pathway into the EVE universe for a whole bunch of players who maybe aren't interested in sort of like your traditional MMO style game of EVE Online, but would love to play a science fiction FPS like what we're offering. And the fact that it has got an integration with EVE Online so that the FPS players will be able to influence the outcome of, you know, the pirate incursions in EVE is incredibly exciting. And so put those two together, plus the other projects that CCP is working on, we're going to be sitting here again in 10 years doing this all over again, I guarantee it.